Welcome to the MIT Open Documentary Lab public lecture series. Today, we're presenting a talk by ScanLab called FRAMERATE, Pulse of the Earth. It's presented as part of our co-creation studio's Worlding workshop with Unity. On behalf of Principal Investigator of the lab, Vivek Bald, Lab Director Sarah Wallazin, Worlding producer Srushti Kamat, and Paisley Smith of Unity Technologies. It's really my pleasure to welcome you. My name is Kat Cizek, and I'm the artistic director and a research scientist at the studio. Just a few words about Worlding. It's a first-of-its-kind research and development initiative that explores climate futures at the intersection of documentary, land use planning, speculative modeling, and game engine technologies. 5 teams over the course of the last 2 weeks have been working at this intersection to gather together with 25 guest advisors from MIT, Unity, and domain experts. This work has been made possible through our ongoing support from MacArthur Foundation and Just Films Ford Foundation. And we're thrilled today to have the team from ScanLab come and speak to us and give our closing keynote of Worlding. I'm just going to quickly introduce them, invite them to open their cameras, and we'll get started. So thrilled to have you both here today. Anita Jones is the senior producer at ScanLab, producing immersive art installation FRAMERATE Pulse of the Earth, which has appeared at La Biennale, South by, Phi Center in Montreal. Prior to ScanLab, Anita produced Anagram's Goliath, Playing with Reality, which won the Grand Jury Prize for VR at La Biennale. And Matthew Shaw, also known as Matt, is co-founder of ScanLab projects. His background is in architecture, storytelling, and speculation about digital cities of the future. Matt has led the successful delivery of high-profile, large-budget projects across the arts, TV, immersive media, including IUK, AOTF, and R&D project FRAMERATE. We're so thrilled to have you today. Welcome.
Thank you, everybody. My name is Matt. I'm co-founder of ScanLab Projects, and I just wanted to start by saying a big thanks, actually, to everybody for having us, really. It's an absolute honor to be here presenting today. The Worlding program is just super exciting, and a world that we are very interested in. It's a real honor to have been sharing FRAMERATE with the teams over the course of the last few days, and I'm very excited to speak to you all today, so thank you.
Yeah, and I'm Anita, and I'm senior producer at ScanLab. So ScanLab, we're a team of artists, architects, designers, producers, software developers, and photographers, all working together to explore 3D scanning as the future of photography and as a tool for immersive storytelling.
We're going to start today by visiting a beach. This is the cliff line at the village of Haysborough in Norfolk on the east coast of the United Kingdom. 6 homes have fallen over the edge of this cliff over the last 10 years. Another 13 were purposefully demolished before they fell. This included 7 forced evictions. Documented as a millimeter perfect 3D scan every single day for a year, what you're seeing here is the most precise record of coastal erosion ever recorded. Visiting this coastline every day, our team experienced 2 named storms, Storm Hannah and Storm Ataya. They chatted with the dog walkers who love this coastline, who walk it every day. Some of those dog walkers' careers and livelihoods have suffered as the village tumbles over the cliff. They and the village are in a process known as managed retreat. Brad and Paul, the local photographers who scanned this site every day, would descend into the tidal zone, often at ungodly hours, to access during low tide sites that were often 10 or 12 feet underwater by the time the high tide came in a few hours later. They'd regularly populate our health and safety WhatsApp channel with photos of woolly mammoth and woolly rhino teeth, exposed by the ferocious tides. One particular day, the oldest human footprints ever seen outside of Africa, estimated to be 850,000 years old, are exposed within this data set. Brad and Paul and the dog walkers are walking the same fragile clay surface that Homo antecessors walked all those years ago. So this data set holds the stories of humans living on the edge for hundreds of thousands of years. But it's also real valuable scientific data. Findings from our collaboration with the British Geological Survey using these exact scans are currently under peer review with the journal Nature. But more importantly, to us anyway, this is beautiful. And that's why we first gathered this data. It wasn't to prove a scientific theory or to monitor a community under threat, but because we had this kind of strange instinct that at a monumental scale, seeing a landscape shift over time would look spectacular. And it would make us and it would make our audiences stop and think and consider the planet that we're inhabiting as a pulsing and shifting physical space that operates on different timescales. Timescales that a planet that we sometimes influence and we're sometimes powerless to stop. We hope these visuals would make our audiences think and feel on a different timescale, on seasonal time, on tidal time, and on geological time. Ultimately, that's why we make art at ScanLab. We use our craft as a way to bear witness to the world. So we've borne witness to melting ice in the Arctic. We've observed ancient structures. We've even turned the eyes of these machines, or early prototypes of these machines, on our firstborn children. This is Ezra, Will's firstborn, and Nola, my firstborn. We believe seeing the world through the eyes of 3D laser scanners can help us glimpse into a future which we'll all inhabit. FRAMERATE, the project that we'll talk about today, isn't just an artwork, and it's not just a data set. It's also a prototype for a time when documenting the physical world at this scale, at this resolution, and at this frequency is just the norm. At ScanLab, we assume that relatively soon, 1 billion autonomous vehicles and mobile devices equipped with LiDAR cameras will be perpetually recording and updating 4D replicas of the world. In fact, this is already happening. This will make the future versions of Google Maps that enable us and the digital archaeologists of the future to revisit all places and all moments in time in the same way that we've just revisited the beaches at Haysborough in 2019. We'll bear witness to those scenes from the position that we recorded them from, much like traditional photographs. But we'll also stray from that position of capture and drift amongst the data, seeing previously unseen views. We'll wander around in this perpetually updated data, and this will be a version of the world that we'll inhabit. It's for that reason that we believe that 3D scanning and that the processes that we're employing here are the future of photography.
So in this keynote, we're going to talk about how we made FRAMERATE, why we made FRAMERATE, and the environmental impact of making FRAMERATE. We'll explore the data that FRAMERATE has recorded and the scientific value that this data and the whole project holds for climate futures. We'll talk about FRAMERATE as an artwork and a piece of novel documentary making. And finally, we'll talk about creating art through 3D LiDAR scans, why we, ScanLab, are obsessed with it, and how we believe it is the future of photography. Because as you'll come to see, FRAMERATE is a 5-year-long, all-encompassing project that exists as pioneering technological R&D, carries unique data about our planet, has scientific value, and is a moving piece of new cinematic art. We'll start with a preview.
FRAMERATE's created from thousands of daily 3D time-lapse scans of the British landscape, collected every single day for over 2 years. The work observes change on a scale which is impossible to see with the lens of traditional cameras. Locations we've been documenting have been really carefully chosen. First of all, a series of sites in the UK which observe changes that are predominantly driven by nature. So we've scanned forests from winter through spring to summer and through the leaves falling in the autumn. We've scanned blossoming gardens. And we've also studied locations where humans are directly the cause of the landscape scale change. Our species carving away at the surface of the earth or recycling the waste that's the byproduct of our modern world. We've watched the dramatic and systematic harvesting of forests and beaches where sand moves with every new tide and the cliffs are in steady retreat. I wanted to take a moment here to refine what we mean when we say we, actually. As part of FRAMERATE, we work with local photographers. They're people who are already an embedded part of the community. We train them in the art of 3D scanning and in seeing the world in this amazing new way. This is Demelza, and she worked alongside Kunal, documenting landscapes in Glasgow and Scotland for most of 2021. This is Paul, bravely scanning despite the oncoming cattle, and his colleague Brad. Together they worked in Norfolk in 2019 as the first kind of heroic scanning team, venturing out every single day, literally come rain, shine, flood, storm, for a year to document the coastline gardens, forests and farms of Norfolk on the east coast of England. And then there's the rest of the team in the studio, based in London, but also in Romania, in France, and in North America, with a mix of backgrounds from documentary, film and theatre production, photography, software development, architecture and design. Returning to that beach, I'm just going to dig into these scans a little bit and kind of help you guys understand the scale of what we're talking about here and understand the level of detail. So this scan is mapping 600 meters of beach. What you can see on the screen here is a data set made up of 540 million points. So you can start to see this incredible level of detail as we zoom into that data. These are vast data sets, but we have this level of detail, individual pebbles, individual kind of, just above sand scale across the entire beach. And in documenting these coastal locations over time, we've witnessed some truly spectacular events. This is day one at one of our scanning sites, a location called Side Strand. This is day 169, where Brad witnessed this kind of small scale landslide happening. And then day 171, I think it is, the entire position that we've been scanning from has been wiped out by a kind of once in a lifetime landslide event. But it's really starting to animate this data where it comes to life. It comes to life for us visually, but it's also come to life for us with our collaborators at the British Geological Survey. They're seeing in shots like this really precise visual evidence for beach life cycles that they've been kind of theorizing for years and years. You know, one of the colleagues that we've been working with there, she's been thinking about this particular stretch of beach for over 30 years. She's been visiting it as many times as she can a year, but she's never been able to see true kind of spatial evidence of the processes that she's known are happening there. And she's been able to draw in diagram, but never kind of proved before. And we've been able to take our collaborators kind of one step further than pre-rendered visuals. We've had these data sets running in a real-time environment inside a VR headset, and we give them control over time. We give them control over view, and we allow them to kind of interrogate on a meter by meter scale what's actually going on inside this coastline environment. That's not just true of beaches, it's true for forests, gardens, stations, quarries. In total, 28 locations and counting that have been scanned for between 6 and 12 months every single day. Billions and billions of points. The first paper using these data sets is under peer review with Nature Scientific Data Journal at the moment. And I guess that marks the kind of first moment in many, many, many collaborations which we hope happen with this data. So we've collected all of this data. It's ScanLab property at the moment, but we are in the process of building the FRAMERATE open data archive, which for no fee at all would allow scientists, researchers, and educators to use these data sets for appropriate research and discovery, in the same way that the British Geological Survey have been able to do so far. And alongside that, it's impossible to ignore the fact that we're in a climate emergency and that the current path for human-based emissions will heat the planet way beyond 1.5 degrees. As a studio, we've always been aware of that. We've been conscious of the impacts that our work and our projects have. And in 2021, as part of the FRAMERATE process, actually, we began to take some really rigorous steps to quantify and to reduce our impact. Environmental concerns are, I guess, at the core of what we're trying to show with FRAMERATE. It demonstrates how the world's changing over time. But at the same time, we aim for the FRAMERATE installation to be a space where we can maybe kind of take a break from climate anxiety and think deeply and calmly about dramatic changes that are happening to the world around us. We've also interrogated, very deeply the processes inside our studio. We publish quite kind of brutally, honestly, really, the making processes that are involved in the project and across the studio. And one of the things that we've done as well is really interrogate and publicly share the way that we make big climate influencing decisions. Every time we take a flight, for example, that's documented and a public decision and we publicize the decision-making process that we go through there. We've also used the FRAMERATE project as a way to kind of really dig in and try and improve some of our production techniques. So we just interrogate here, for example, the differences between our production techniques in 2019 and 2021. This is the difference in impact from the miles traveled as we were setting up those projects, finding our positions, training our local photographers. So saving 30% on those processes. We've also been able to dramatically reduce the daily impact of our team going out scanning every single day, using only electric vehicles and considering the routing between our locations. And that's had a kind of considerable impact on the total carbon output from the making of the project. But obviously we're not really comparing like for like there. So this kind of metric here supposes that we'd run the Glasgow element of the project under the 2019 processes that we were employing in Glasgow. And it represents a kind of 80% reduction in the production impacts of that particular stage of the project. Now, these are all places which we can get to by train. These are places where which we know and can kind of access quite easily in the United Kingdom. The FRAMERATE project is something that we aim for, and indeed is starting to become a global thing. So this conversation is only going to get harder as we need to travel around the world to continue this project. But we're committed to digging into that on a day-to-day basis and publicizing the work that we're doing, to be honest about that.
So as Max explained, FRAMERATE is a pioneering science, data, and R&D project that's been running across several years. But FRAMERATE is also a beautiful, groundbreaking artwork and a new form of documentary storytelling. Our FRAMERATE technique of 3D LiDAR time-lapse not only contributes to scientific research, but also offers a uniquely captivating perspective on the environments recorded. We've been playing chapters from FRAMERATE before each day of sessions of the Welding Conference, so hopefully the attendees will think the same too. By way of background, I'm a documentary producer, and prior to working at ScanLab, I worked across a number of different mediums: VR, AR, online journalism, broadcast TV features for The Guardian, The Economist, Channel 4, and other platforms and broadcasters. But the common thread was always non-fiction storytelling. Everything project that I worked on was documentary in some form. And I've always understood documentary as holding a crafted story narrative as paramount to engaging the audience with the subject matter. All documentary, though containing elements of truth, the truth is also manipulated, and creative or artistic license is necessarily employed to varying degrees, but those varying degrees are not always apparent. However, since being at ScanLab, 3D LiDAR scanning has been a new way for me to understand the documentary form, seeing the scanner as recording the world from a true documentary standpoint. Everything that the scanner records and that the viewer sees are factual data points, offering empirical and measurable evidence. Through a combination of Unity software and our studio's internal proprietary software, which we like to call Renderella, we're able to edit these time-lapse scans together, creating a 3D model sequence of the landscapes and its movements changing over time. We can view this 3D model sequence and build virtual cameras that allow perspectives on the sequence from infinite angles. So, for example, from a bird's eye view perspective or a worm's eye view perspective, close-ups, wide shots, etc. We can also create cinematic camera paths, including zooms, pans, fly-throughs, and we can play with the pace and scale of the visuals that play back, allowing a story to be told simply visually. With these tools, our team of point cloud artists, under the direction of directors Matt and Will, have produced cinematic moving imagery with the factual data that was recorded. And the visual output is uniquely enthralling and utilizes non-lenticular space to surprise and engage audiences. Documentary filming with the 2D camera allows a filmmaker to play with the presentation of reality and to manipulate fact. You can select a specific perspective on a particular situation to film. You can choose what you want to have in and what you want to leave out of the frame. You can warp the scene with this perspective play that can be manipulated by carefully selected camera lenses. And you can choose what from that perspective that you've recorded that you then want to edit into the final film to serve your narrative in the edit suite. Documentary LiDAR scanning is similar in that multiple perspectives on a particular situation is possible. You still select where to place the scanner tripod, but as it records in 3D, it's harder to leave things out of the frame. And then all those different perspectives that you record remain available through post-production, which is generally where the artistry really comes to life. And you can view what you've recorded from those multiple angles and scales. I think this is particularly fascinating when I think about some of the scenes I've shot previously in documentary film, and the frustrations when you come back to the edit suite and you're wishing, if only I could have recorded that person doing that action from a slightly different angle. And so with FRAMERATE, with regards to the recordings of the landscapes, our LiDAR techniques offer us a fresh perspective on these locations. We return from a shoot and we get to interrogate the data, and that's always an extra compelling experience. we tend to find new details and the less obvious spots of beauty, or the surprising changes that occur within each site. It also helps us to show an audience things in their own environment that they might not normally notice. For example, how people crowd, or how things in the scene are built or arranged. The films that we've produced with these visuals have no voiceover, no talking heads. We simply present the time-lapse imagery to a moving soundtrack composed by composer Pascal Wise. Through this, we invite and provoke thoughts about environmental change by bringing to light the imperceivable shifts in our surroundings and the significant alterations to our landscapes and climates that are in progress. In a sense, it's a piece of activism, a way of engaging audiences with the changing world around us and with the climate crisis, but simply through presentation of fact that can be uniquely interpreted for each individual, rather than us trying to didactically hammer home a message through a voiceover or other tools like that. We do, however, accompany the installation with facts that offer some context. Yet these facts are presented in a sort of vague, dreamlike context, because they're a combination of real facts and also creative facts that have been based on reality in some way. So, for example, Matt mentioned the woolly mammoth teeth that our scanning technicians discovered. So we'll use those. We'll say there's 3 woolly mammoth teeth. But then we'll also mention that 817 dogs that we imagine were walked, when, of course, it's hard for us to know the real answer. And so, because the recordings are a true form of documentary, a scientific fact, the artwork we produce with them intentionally plays with that very same sense of reality, much like a documentary film. So moving on to Pulse of the Earth. So we designed the installation as a spatial, multi-screen immersive work, which we've called FRAMERATE Pulse of the Earth. The films play in chapter sequence, cycling through the different landscapes and scenes that we've recorded. For example, we might see activity at a dairy farm across a working day, followed by witnessing a 12-month period at a Glaswegian quarry. And then we might see a forest changing seasons across the year. The bright films play across 8 LG OLED screens that have been distributed carefully at different heights and orientations. We usually put 2 on the floor, we have some standing horizontally, vertically, and we'll have 1 on the ceiling in a completely blacked out room. Matt and Will's backgrounds as architects mean that the space is always carefully designed for each venue or environment that the work is exhibited in, to create a meditative environment, a place where people are invited to be present and feel fully grounded in the moment as they enjoy the captivating visuals. Our aim is always to craft a calm experience, to offer a space for reflection and contemplation. We encourage the audience to have autonomy and to play their own part in the stories unfolding across the scenes, inviting them to move around and explore and have their own personal experience. There's always an element of FOMO, for those who aren't familiar, fear of missing out, in the screen layouts we design. So ultimately, there is just way too much to see at any one moment in FRAMERATE. So with that, you're motivated to move your body around the space and to explore, to make sure you catch the small details and the overall picture. This is particularly successful when multiple audience members are inside the space together, motivating each other to move and seek out different aspects. Each time we've shown the work, the response is always very moving and surprising. The audiences, are invited to see the destruction, extraction, habitation, harvest, growth, and erosion, all caused by human and natural impact for themselves, as I mentioned previously, presented as fact. But we find in doing this, they tend to draw their own patterns, leaving the installation having had their own profound and individual experience. As it's a meditative space, we find it tends to bring up different responses and emotions. We find that the autonomy that people have over the length of time that they'd like to spend in the space mean that some spend only 20 minutes inside, whereas others might spend 2 hours. Some audience members emerge in tears. Many had to sit and decompress after because of the reflections that the work brings up. It definitely meant, from a personal perspective, that I had to release my tightly held notion of what documentary storytelling is. And I now fully respect the craft of telling a story which has no right or wrong way for it to be read. The work has exhibited internationally at La Biennale in Venice, South by Southwest, COP26, London Film Festival, and at the Phi Centre in Montreal. It's been received pretty well. We've had reviews from The Guardian, The Times, and others. And there's interest in another long-term European exhibition to be staged in the spring. But currently, today, it's actually on show in Taiwan, which brings me to Echoes from Taiwan. So this time last year, our team brought the FRAMERATE technique to Taiwan to record the first international chapter of FRAMERATE, called Echoes from Taiwan. We recorded at various sites across the island. And as with our approach across England and Scotland, we trained local Taiwanese photographers on the 3D scanning technique. But rather than recording scans over a long-term period, we recorded high-frequency time-lapse like scans, so spending only a day at each of our 7 locations. Here's, I'm going to cycle through a few of what the sites look like for real and the scanned versions. So here you can see we were scanning farmers picking tea at undulating bushes in Yilan County in Taiwan. And in the next image, you'll see the same tea plantation seen from a bird's eye view, heavily scaled. And in the next image, this is our local photographer, William, who we trained on the 3D scanner, scanning at Ningxia Night Market in Taipei. And in the next image, you'll see the scanned version, which really records the bustle and the movement within the night market. In the next image, this is Shitushan Huanhua Temple in Miaoli County, probably the most beautiful place I've ever been. It's a temple high up in the mountains, really in the clouds. And in the next image, you'll see a scanned version of the same site. Here we recorded the change in color of the sun as it moved across the course of the day. And finally, this is an overnight night market in Taipei, where we time-lapse scanned the fish auction going from totally quiet to immensely busy. And yeah, here's a little glimpse of what it looks like. So William Trossel, who's Matt's ScanLab co-director and also FRAMERATE co-director, is currently in Taiwan at the moment, producing the installation at TCCF, which is in Taipei, and it actually opened to the public today. So yeah, keen to hear how reviews are. So Echoes from Taiwan is our first international chapter of the FRAMERATE project, and we're really hoping to record additional chapters that bear witness to the climate futures of other countries across the world going forward. But as well as sort of exploring different locations, we're also interested in exploring other modes of spatial presentations of the work. Briefly, here's an example. This is our Horizon project with an iteration of FRAMERATE we've been developing, which you'll see floor to ceiling 8K screen, where you can see every detail of the scan. And then here is Immerse, which you walk in and the audience will be submerged in a room of projections.
I'm going to talk now a little more about the future of photography, or at least how we talk about it at ScanLab. This is a project called The Dream Life of Driverless Cars, which was developed with the New York Times over 7 years ago now. The project takes the now kind of everyday truth that autonomous vehicles use LiDAR to see the world, to avoid bumping into things, essentially. But it also speculates on what else these vehicles can see. It speculates on the other part of our world that they are becoming the cartographers of. It questions how much of the city that they can see, what they think of those bits of the city that they're seeing. It reinforces the errors that these machines make. recording things twice as they go around corners. It explores the density of information, the lack of density in less traveled parts of the city or in shaded parts of the city, the increased density in more popular vehicle routes. It suggests the opportunity for black spots on the map. The project builds whole worlds in small traffic jams. We get less detail when we drive fast. The whole world bumps as a result of a single speed bump. So we're fascinated by the mistakes that might appear in data sets like this. We're interested in what happens when those mistakes are never checked and found by humans, but they're only mistakes that decisions around their validity are made solely by machines. We're fascinated by the maps that these machines make and the ownership of those maps as well. It's not the USGS making maps or the Ordnance Survey here in the UK. It's Google, it's Amazon, it's companies such like that. We're also fascinated by who these spaces become designed for ultimately. Facades are for our eyes, for the purpose of keeping buildings warm and dry, but they're also becoming for the virtual eyes of autonomous vehicles, as navigational devices, as advertising billboards for the virtual visitors who will read these new maps in the future. Photography is also used to preserve memories. This project is the memory of a lost landscape. It's actually one of the first projects that Will and I ever worked on together nearly 13 years ago now. This image is taken at 81 degrees north in the Fram Strait between Greenland and Svalbard. We're working here with sea ice scientists from Cambridge University. Their story actually starts on a scale kind of zoomed out from this image with satellite imagery. These images that you're seeing on screen now are then taken with a drone. So they kind of validate what's happening at the satellite scale with a little bit more resolution. And then we would take over. You can tell the age of this project by the age of that scanner over there. We would take over at the scale of an individual ice floe, a frozen piece of the surface of the ocean. We would map that piece of ice to a level of detail that had never been done before at this time. We'd study ice floes that were the size of kind of whole football fields. We'd study smaller ones that were the size of basketball courts. We're particularly interested in the thicker areas of these ice, the pressure ridges, where bits of the frozen surface of the ocean would collide into each other. And they do a kind of fast form of plate tectonics, building these thicker tentacles that spread out through the Arctic. And it was actually those pressure ridges that the scientists were observing that were thought to be and proven to be the kind of cooling, refrigerating tentacles that keep the Arctic cold enough during the summer months so that all of the thinner ice can survive. We take some of our scans of individual ice floes and, we fed that data to the scientists we were working with. It ultimately was the basis for a whole series of PhD projects. But we wanted to do something much more visceral and for our own audiences with that work. So we took some of the 3D data sets, we turned them into meshes, we turned those meshes into 3D prints, we turned those 3D prints into molds. And then we recast these ice floes as a little kind of archipelago of 7 or 8 individual pieces of ice. And we installed them in a gallery space in central London. Some of these pieces of ice were massive. They measured more than 1 meter across. Some of them were absolutely tiny, the size of a small plate. They were all cast at exactly 1 to 200 scale from the originals. And of course, over time, this exhibition melted. It actually melted the fastest on opening night because more people came. The breadth and the presence of our audience members melted our exhibition about the Arctic. The more people came, the faster the exhibition disappeared in front of their eyes. The sound of dripping would fill the air. We had these little drip details that would drop the water down into trays that were exactly sized to hold the amount of water that could that was melting from each individual flow, and then it would just teeter over the edge and leak onto the floor. And on the days when we were able to install the larger pieces of ice, that kept the smaller pieces of ice safe. But on some days, because those larger pieces of ice were taking so long to freeze, we would put small guys in there alone, and they would last a matter of hours because they didn't have these bigger pieces of ice to keep them safe. We'll talk briefly about another documentary project as well, this one much more recent. I guess in a way, this is a live documentary. It's a collaboration with the French artist Pierre Huet, and it's seen us document this entire island in Norway on the scale of an island, but also on the scale of individual moments, documented to an incredible level of detail, captured through a process of LiDAR and photogrammetry. So some of these individual models are created from over 7,500 images per detailed model. They highlight a number of live and evolving interventions on the site. Now, audiences see these interventions in person. As part of the artwork, you visit the island and you walk around it physically. But the entire model comes together when audiences discover this enormous 8K LED screen in the forest in the middle of the island. It's running a real-time Unity-based simulation of the landscape. This landscape is also shifting over time. So at a landscape scale and at a microscopic scale, mutations within the data are happening on a daily basis. And physically, the site is actually being manipulated by humans and also by nature. So as I said, the digital landscape and the physical landscape will be evolving over a 15-year period. And what's going on under the hood here? Actually, the last 4 slides are the first slides from this presentation where I've shown you true stills from a real-time environment. And you'll see actually that there hasn't been a difference in detail from all of the frame rate content, which is pre-rendered, to what we're seeing now here in a kind of real-time simulation. So we got this super impressive level of detailing and data management system going on in the back there. And we haven't had to lose that kind of visual fidelity that's so kind of crucial to ScanLab's work when we present this permanently running piece in real time. Over to you, Anita.
So this brings us to Felix's room. So Felix's room has been our studio's first foray into live theatre. And it's a collaboration with the Berliner Ensemble and Komische Oper, a major theatre and opera house based in Germany, and with writer-director Adam Gans. So through this piece of hybrid digital theatre, together we told the true story of Adam's late great-grandfather, Felix Gans, and his wife, Erna. Felix was a successful businessman in Mainz in Germany, but sadly he and his wife, Erna, sadly lost their lives, which ended in Auschwitz in 1945 when Felix was 75 years old. However, prior to that, Felix and wife lived a highly cultured life and he had an illustrious career. He was a real member of high society. He traveled the world extensively. He was a collector and lover of music, furniture, and art. And through real letters, photos, and other documentary evidence that was recovered, we were able to recreate aspects of Felix and Erna's life. This included a drawing that Felix did of the room that he and his wife were forcibly moved into in a so-called Judenhaus in Mainz. Using this image and also this chest of drawers, which was found in a Mainz museum, it had been confiscated from the Gans family in the early 1900s, and it's sort of real documentary evidence that we were able to bring to the stage, and it took center stage along with all our other characters, and we had composer Tonya Ko bring it to life through music. So the chest sang on stage alongside all our other characters. And through 3D LiDAR scanning, we recreated every detail and precise measurement of the room that Felix Gans had drawn in his picture. And we projected this onto 5 different surfaces using the material hollow gauze, so we could have 3D projections. We played with the perspective of the room, turning it on its side and having our actors mimic as if they were standing up straight, even though here they're actually lying down, and spinning around the room in various disorienting ways. We projected dancers to evoke a sense of memory of when Felix and wife lived in their mansion prior to being forcibly moved. We crafted a 1-hour piece of hybrid digital theatre and were able to bring Felix and his wife's story to life, but defining him not by his ending that we know about him, but by the full life that he was able to lead.
Okay, we're going to bring the talk to a close now and bring you guys right up to date with some news on the FRAMERATE project, actually. So we're very excited to announce a working title of a project, Desert Pulse, with Desert Botanical Garden based in Phoenix in Arizona. This is an evolution of the FRAMERATE technique, which we're taking to the deserts in and around Phoenix. And I thought I'd just show you a couple of very recent photographs. The team have been on site there for working for the last kind of 10 days. This is one of our locations, and what you're looking at here is what we call a saguaro shadow. This is a recent fire site, or a fire that happened towards the end of last summer, a place called Sycamore Creek, which is about an hour's drive outside of Phoenix. What you can just about see on the ground here is the ghost or the outline of where a fallen saguaro has burnt so intensely that it's melted the desert sand. So you can just see the trunk and the arms of the saguaro in the outline on the ground there. This is us there about 10 days ago with lead scientist Dr. Kim McHugh from Desert Botanical Gardens inspecting this particular spot. She's actually looking at the remnants of the roots. This fire had burned so intensely it had burned the roots underground. And this has become one of the scan spots amongst 21, which we've just started scanning. You can see just about in the photo here, Khalif and Charles, our latest local photographer recruits, will be undertaking this scanning process for the next 12 months. And one of the reasons why we're scanning this particular site is that fire shouldn't happen in deserts. These are not like grasslands or some of the forests in Europe and other parts of North America, where fire is a natural part of the cycle. Fire just didn't naturally occur in deserts, at least hardly ever. Fire is increasing in regularity around the Phoenix area. It's humans causing those fires, but it's climate change and it's the increased temperatures that are allowing those fires to sustain and to travel. But it's not just a story of doom and gloom. One of the most incredible things about this fire site is that life is just creeping back into existence there as well, and that's one of the things that we expect to observe over the course of the coming year is that site making some form of recovery. Although that saguaro, which will be over 175 years old, probably will obviously not recover. So we did want to end on a hopeful note here, actually, because FRAMERATE isn't just about the gloom, and it's not just about the terrible things that we're doing to the world. It's also about the wonderful, incredible social things that we've created together as a species. In Britain, one of those incredible social institutions is the pub. And the pub features in the original documentation of FRAMERATE. So I'd like you guys all to join myself and Anita now. And we're going to visit the Royal Oak, which is on Columbia Road in Hackney in East London. for one last parting glimpse into the FRAMERATE project.
Playing a little jumpy for me, but I'm not sure if that's the case for everyone else.
Looks good to me.
So thank you all very much for joining us. And I think we're going to stop screen sharing and you'll be able to see everybody's faces again shortly.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anita and Matt. We raise our glass to you in that beer hall. And we thank you for this incredible time lapse of your work. I'm going to invite all the panelists to start opening their cameras and gathering their questions, and also invite our people on the webinar to drop your questions in the Q&A function of the Zoom. We're so thrilled to have Paisley here, Paisley Smith from Unity Technologies. Thank you for being with us today. And also the director of Open Documentary Lab, Sarah, hello. I'm going to pass to Srushti to introduce our other panelists. And please start thinking of your questions and raising your digital hands on the panel.
Thank you so much, Kat. I will do this quickly so we can get to Q&A. We're really honored here to be joined first by Gayatri from Living with Snow Leopards, which is a mixed reality documentary. It's about the human inhabitants of the Himalayas and their complex relationship with endangered snow leopards. We have Amy and Tracy from Fisherchild, a virtual reality experience from South Africa, which builds on the ancestral archival work of sixth-generation Fisherchild Tracy Kauai. It builds on the natural ecosystems from the custodians of land and sea. We also have Christina from Our Family Garden. Hi, Christina, which is a participatory digital memorial. It is situated as a medicinal plant garden within the 32-kilometer line of the abandoned war trenches surrounding Sarajevo. We also have Jordan from Greenprint. Hi, Jordan. A simulator game beginning on a plantation in Georgetown, South Carolina. Players and residents of the local community contribute to building a collective blueprint for a sustainable real world. We also have Miguel from ADL, an immersive documentary, hi Miguel, that digitally reconstructs pre-Hispanic Lake Texcoco as a way to contrast and examine Mexico City's current water crisis. So those are the 5 projects and the representatives from each team, Matt and Adetta. So we wanted to give you an overview of who you're speaking with. And we're also joined by 2 of the mentors and OpenDocLab fellows, Max Musau, founder of G-Way Studios, and Riot Gesbik, an incredible artist. So without further ado, I think we're going to go right to Q&A. Kat, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Srushti. So yes, very much within the worlding community, Open Documentary Lab community, so many intersections. Who would like to start with a question? Is there anybody on the panel?
I do. First of all, so grateful and inspired by your work. We got to open up each day with your work, and it was so inspiring. So thank you. and I have so many questions, but I'll just start with first. With our project with the green print, we are bringing in 3D scans of the land so that community members can plan on the land and have, the data readily available to them. So we are using LiDAR in that process. And we found to have some red tape, specifically with the plantation that we're working on, being that it's a wildlife reserve. There are murmurs of what the LiDAR may uncover and what that might bring up for the local community. And so we've since moved on to land that we own, but while we're still working on that process to scan the plantation. So my question to you is two parts. How do you select your sites? Like, what's the why behind the sites that you select? And what is your process of gaining access and permission? And have you encountered any obstacles with this?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And the project sounds super exciting. I'd love to hear a little more about it. What's the process for selecting? I mean, it's complicated. Obviously, like when we actually first selected our sites for FRAMERATE, we were slightly more in the mindset of testing out this idea that you could document a landscape changing over time. So beaches and coastal erosion in particular were at the right scale and at the right, unfortunately for the communities there, guaranteed level of change to actually test this technique out. But very quickly, it became clear that, what is the story that is hard to tell that this technique could tell? It's climate change, it's a shifting planet. It's something that we all kind of know. Even the scientists know it's happening, but they've never been able to put their fingers on it, And we were really able to do that in such a successful way. So, climate, either natural or human-led processes is now the guiding force behind all FRAMERATE site selections, I would say. And as you've heard from Phoenix, that process is still ongoing. How do we get permission? It's always complex. I guess a few things to say that we've developed over the years is we try to have a very good kind of data sovereignty approach. So whoever owns the land, either historically or currently, is guaranteed the access to our data as much as we can enable. That is complicated. We've had similar situations like yourselves with the plantation, where people have been like, actually, what is this data going to be able to legally prove in future that I don't want to have evidence? We've only ever had one site where that has been a prohibiting factor, but we have found a way around it. Yeah, it's tricky, but it's kind of tricky in the same way that that all location permissions are tricky, I guess. But I think that data sovereignty thing in particular for us has always been important, because nobody knows what this data will be useful for in the future. That's why someone's got legal concerns there, but it's also why it's so important that whoever's land it is has the access to that and can exploit it in, so some of our data sovereignty agreements, I would argue that they're super well, they try to be super generous, because you can't expect people to know the value of this right now, but you want to ensure that the right people can capitalize on that value.
Yeah, I would also just add to that as well and say, from a very practical perspective, certainly when we've been trying to negotiate access to locations in Phoenix, and when we did the same in Taiwan, if you've got the resources to, then working with a specialist location manager who have already got access to all those sort of like all the people, or the, like for us, it was like the National Forest Service, or the Taiwanese Ministry of Culture, who own certain sites, that kind of access that can be kind of fast tracked by people already having those conversations, already having those contacts and connections, and understanding any kind of cultural sensitivities, if there are any, in the locations you're looking at, is always helpful.
data sovereignty. Beautiful concept. Gayatri.
Yeah, thank you so much for the presentation, for your project, and for sharing it so openly over here, with the community. I guess one thing that really comes across in your work is that sometimes as artists or creatives, you're starting a process which then leads to scientific research and discoveries, and not necessarily always the other way around. So that's really fascinating about your work. And with that, I would like to ask, when you do these LiDAR scans, it's so much also what you mentioned, it's so much about the importance of the level of detail and documenting to such a high degree of level of detail. So I'm just wondering what would be lost if let's say you were to go 100 times less on the level of detail, like in terms of the story, in terms of the experience, and also in terms of the research.
Yeah, it's another really brilliant question, and a live kind of topic of research for us, I guess. A couple of years ago, when we were documenting the spaces up in Glasgow, we were also actually testing out iPhone LiDAR scanning and doing time lapse, but not with a kind of £60,000 LiDAR scanner, but with a kind of $1,000 LiDAR scanner on phones. At certain scales, we found that to be almost as effective. So we time lapsed the dismantling of a vehicle, and we did it in LiDAR, expensive LiDAR, and we did it in iPhone LiDAR. And arguably the storytelling potential of both of those was as good in a way. It does depend on the subject. And I do think one of the most incredible things about FRAMERATE is being able to look down or being able to look across at a screen and see an entire cliff moving, and then drop your eyes down and see an individual pebble moving. Having those two scales essentially within the same, they are all one and the same, and they're happening at the same time. That's just kind of bonkers, really. And at the moment, cheaper sensors are not quite managing that. But like I've said many times in the talk, I mean, this is just a hypothesis that will be true, in terms of like, we might not have to do any of this data collecting ourselves, right? Like, there's going to be a whole bunch of good and nefarious reasons why this data is collected. And I think as people with a kind of artistic and a critical mindset, it's about getting our hands on those data sets and exploring them. Sorry, I'm not sure if that totally answered your question.
Anita, did you want to add anything?
No.
Christina.
Hi, thank you very much. It's so beautiful to see your work with music and the immersiveness of all the stories. I have two quick questions along the same line. One is, there's this really intense and impressive labor that goes into your data collection, and there's a slowness, like it takes a whole year to build up a whole story. And I wonder, this like labor and slowness and intensity and difficulty of acquiring data, does it create a special connection between human and landscape? For either like people doing the actual scanning, and for people editing the content, and for us, the audience, interacting with it. And my second question is, since the data is factual, but you are sort of curating a story out of it, and how do you make sure this story is sensitive and right? The music you apply is telling the right tone of the story, rather than imposing a view or an interpretation. Thank you very much.
Want to go, Anita?
Sure. In terms of the data and so certainly when I've spoken to Kunal, for example, who was one of the scanners who scanned every single day in Glasgow, and he was a freelancer. He now works in our studio full time. And I can definitely see the way that he talks about these certain sites. Like, so for example, when I first joined ScanLab, I heard everyone speaking, like waxing lyrical about a quarry. And to be honest, I didn't quite get it. And then kind of spoke to Kunal more. And I guess just going there every single day and seeing those, barely perceptible sort of like little minutiae of changes, and seeing a particular site through all the seasons, and and the seasons, because it's Glasgow, is going to be fairly extreme as well. And I think that definitely caused him to have like a very intimate relationship with the environment. And then, of course, in the editing, I think sort of I touched on it during the presentation, when you're kind of combing through the data, it really is a kind of combing through process. You're looking for different spots, like different like treasure within the different, like the landscape. So it might be, it's like it might be something really like small, like a particular mound. If I'm talking about the quarry again, like a particular mound that seems to like grow and like be excavated in really quick succession, like every single day, or whatever. Like the detail might be a particular truck moving around in a cyclical fashion. And I think it's all these sort of like little details in the bigger picture as well that it definitely caused quite a stronger connection to the environment. Is there anything you'd add to that, Matt?
Again, it's just another super astute observation, because it is one of the most beautiful elements of the project. It starts with this kind of slightly bizarre recruiting process where we're like, do you really want to do the same thing every day for a year? This is the job for you. Like, we kind of describe it as like a monk-like existence almost. You do know exactly what you will do at this time in 7.5 months time. But it does, you're absolutely right, it establishes this very, very unique relationship with the place. And it's those anecdotes and stories that come out of humans going there every day that do form like a really important backbone to the work. I think we haven't quite worked out how best to place those stories in the work somehow. You guys experience them by these kind of slightly cheeky little facts that populate each scene. But each of those facts has a kind of 5,000 word essay behind it, and we haven't quite worked out how acoustically or in what form a deeper version of those stories might reach audiences.
Yeah, I would also like, so as well as sort of like the long-term scans, as I mentioned, like for example with Taiwan, we did these high frequency ones. So at a particular site, we were only there for 12 hours or less. And so, but even with those sites, through the post-production process, you're really getting a sense of like the patterns that happen in a particular space. So for example, with the fish market and the auction that happens, like the space goes from completely desolate and empty to like very rammed and rapid, and there's this like buzz and energy, and it all just happens so quickly, but you can tell this must happen sort of like night upon night. And I guess it's sort of like that rhythm that you become quite intimate with as well during post-production, even if you're not there for very long when shooting. You asked another question as well, but I can't remember what it was, sorry.
It was about curating the narrative. How do you know that you've told the right story?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I think Anita put it very nicely in the presentation, actually, is that we're kind of trying not to tell a story at all. And it's actually quite often a case of peeling back and being like, have we left enough fragments for people to do their own storytelling within? But yeah, we do guide it. The music is a huge part of that as well, actually. It sets the tone of how you feel about a space quite often. And so that's the biggest kind of tone setting moment, I'm sure. And it's kind of inescapable that exists in there, and it comes out of a conversation between the studio and Pascal, and why we have gone to that site, because we can change the narrative of a story by changing the audio in there as well, for sure.
Right.
Thanks, Kat. Hi, Anita. Hi, Matt. Thank you so much for your presentation. It's really beautiful, powerful work. I was sitting here taking lots of notes because it generated so much thought. So I'll just share a small part of that, because I know we have many people who want to speak and ask, hopefully, what is a succinct question. So some of the things I was thinking about watching your work is just thinking about this history of this technology, right? And I think this is something that so many of us in this space think about a lot, right? Which is, right, surveillance technology, right, which LiDAR comes out of, right? And the sort of imperative, right, of colonial mapping projects that a lot of technologies historically have helped to implement. And so I think your project sits at a really interesting nexus of this, right? Because you are utilizing these to look at something else, right? You're utilizing this technology to look at transformation of a landscape over time. So I think there's this interesting question around what Gayatri was saying is right, which is what is the imperative for looking at that scale, right? Which she so beautifully surfaced. And I think of thinking along those lines, I guess I'm just wondering about what truth sort of this projects or these projects put forth, and what truths these technologies also mask, and then how you make that legible for your audiences. So I'm thinking specifically about the maybe older piece as well, Matt, you were presenting on and talking about LiDAR on cars and the glitches and what it missed in that. So I'm just kind of curious if you two could speak a little bit more to that nuance as a way of seeing that this project puts forth, and then how you make that way of seeing legible for your audiences.
Yeah, again, another brilliant question. I mean, I think I feel I'm not going to answer this one perfectly, but I can throw a few fragments from past conversations at it. I mean, I think just acknowledging straight away as well that, like, yeah, we've seen in the course of kind of 15 years of working with it, we've seen LiDAR go from this, like, you know, nobody knows what it is thing to something that kind of suddenly landed on the scene and became, oh my gosh, the absolute truth. And like that was at a stage where we'd stopped believing in photographs because we knew they could be faked, but suddenly LiDAR seemed to be unfakeable, and quite quickly you started seeing it used in kind of courts of law and stuff like this as this new form of evidence. But like anybody behind a camera, although there's not really anywhere to be behind on the camera, on the LiDAR scanner, you are framing that view. You know, it's something that we still say is like one of the most crucial acts of any of our projects is exactly where that scanner goes from, you know, here to there can make a massive difference. And if you think of a scanner with a range of kind of 350 meters or 5 kilometers, like that shift can mean an entire mountain is in or not in a scene. And that's a massive truth or flaw in the truth when you're thinking about a map in the future that people might kind of uncover. So yeah, acknowledge that there's always somebody making these decisions and always somebody kind of curating it. And actually there's two versions in LiDAR as well, because there's what you make of your world when you scan, and then is how you look at your world in post later on as well. I mean, how do we deliver that truth to our audience? I don't know. I guess there's a responsibility in the studio in a way, like always, like all of us have a responsibility. And, you know, like, I guess it kind of comes down to us as individual people, and then us just collectively kind of discussing that responsibility and discussing whether what we're doing is doing justice to the reason that we set out to do it, or the most important factor that's going on at that particular place in that particular time, as best that we can know it from, you know, being ultimately always outside observers, right? So I think that there's another thing that you said there as well, actually, which is, sorry, Anita. You know, we've definitely gone in 15 years from like, wow, we've got this cool piece of technology and we can get through doors because we've got a cool piece of technology. We've become very aware of like how of the the replicating of ills of the past that LiDAR has enabled us and other people to do, and it's something that we try to be kind of much more conscious of nowadays. But I'm very aware that we're not always perfect on that front, for sure.
I'd say as well, like as part of that, trying to become conscious of like how we use LiDAR and sort of like, yeah, controlling the visuals. We are also trying to, it's important to us to try and democratize as well, like access to LiDAR technology. So we have that ethos when we go to these different places. When we go to Taiwan, we went to Phoenix, in Norfolk, in Glasgow, of like training local photographers on technology, so we can kind of share that knowledge. And also there was another project that we did where we trained up sort of like young filmmakers in the Falklands on the technology so that they can kind of be the authors of their own story and learn how to tell it themselves. And yeah, I'm sure you're all really aware that the new iPhone model has LiDAR technology on it as well now. So we frequently run a few workshops, sort of like trying to train and show people how to use that as well.
New ways of seeing. Sarah.
It's funny, that was my exact question about democratization of the technology. But first, let me say that your work is incredible and it's profound. You know, that's sort of the word that came to me. It's truly profound work. And also, you know, the way you're co-creating, you know, with using not human time, but, you know, seasonal time you talked about, and tidal and geological time, and really working with that. And also, so often, you know, you're making these profound scientific discoveries and creating this data set, but also aesthetic discoveries, and just marrying narrative with science, you know, so it can become more accessible, which you just don't see that often. You know, the scientists do that, and how do you communicate, but that you have that all in one is incredible. And just incredibly it sounds like ethical processes and intricate processes. So just amazing work, and the whole idea of training local photographers. But so along those lines of democratizing, you know, a lot of media makers, documentarians, artists are going to watch this and think, you know, how can I do this? And you do these incredibly scaled projects. But my question was sort of, how are you, you know, is there more to be done? Like, what can media makers, what part of it can they do? You know, perhaps you're using other technologies besides just the phone, and are those accessible? Have you thought about, you know, you do these local workshops? Are there, you know, other online resources that you're sharing about how other people can use this, and your processes, I think? And you're already doing a lot of training. It's clearly part of your work, but I was just to expand on that notion of democratizing the tech. And are you creating new technologies with this process?
I can answer that last bit more readily, but like in terms of technologies that ScanLab make, I mean, we build an enormous amount of software, but we don't really build hardware. We do lots of things with strapping bits of hardware together and putting them in places where they probably shouldn't go. But we actually don't build that many bits of hardware ourselves, although this whole the whole idea of ScanLab did originate from me building a scanner in university a long time ago. Democratizing it, I mean, you know, the iPhone and other mobile devices with spatial sensors on them is going to be a huge thing there as well. And obviously, like this is kind of 5-7 years ago now, but people were saying that when, you know, as LiDAR is the eyes for autonomous vehicles, like it needs to become the size of a postage stamp and cost less than $1. And, you know, that is ultimately happening. As soon as phone manufacturers and vehicle manufacturers are into it, then, you know, that's happening, that's guaranteed. So everyone will be able to get their hands on these sensors in some form or another. I think I kind of see ScanLab's role more crucially in telling people that it's there, because it will probably never look like a point cloud. It will probably look like a really nicely mapped advert on the side of a building, or it will be used like, you know, Apple uses this a lot to just take better photos, take kind of, you know, cleverer photos. But I actually think one of our roles is to tell people that it's there, that it's spatial, that it's mapping, that it, you know, that it can be a form of surveillance technology as well. Like, that's a totally astute point that somebody was making earlier. Yeah, so I think awareness maybe is a slightly bigger mission than democratization, but democratization, we talk about it a lot. We did this project, Your Scans, Your Stories, Your Heritage. I've messed up the name of my own project, but a while ago, and we are perpetually trying to get other similar projects off the ground where lots of people around the world have a small scale LiDAR sensor in their hands and are contributing to a project not dissimilar to FRAMERATE. So
thank you. In the spirit of democracy, I'm going to ask the last three panelists to quickly ask their questions. We're sadly running out of time. So maybe Max, Amy, and then Miguel, if you could just make your comment or question, and then we'll leave it last word to Matt and Anita.
Hi, Matt. Hi, Anita. Great work. Amazing visuals. We recently did a few scans across Nairobi with LiDAR scan due to a collaboration with Emerson College. And so my question is more technical. What device did you use exactly? And maybe you can share the kind of software that you used through it. And do you think the process was cost effective?
Kat, do you want us to answer quickly, or do you want to wait for all three questions?
Maybe let's get all three in, just in the spirit of fairness.
My question is about perspective as well. It's so incredible how having this kind of planetary scale perspective gives us kind of a context for our value systems, helps us to be able to imagine the scale of what is going on. But my question is about Anita, you spoke about how your perspective on telling stories, and particularly the documentary form, has shifted through making this work. And I wondered if you could elaborate a little bit on what exactly has shifted for you.
And for me, really fast, I want to know a little bit more about the sound, because I feel really deep, and I know that you are not trying to tell a story, but it's really engagement, you know, and yeah, a little more. And that's my
maybe I'll do Miguel and Max quickly, and then I'll leave you, Anita, to close us up with Amy's. Yeah, we use Faro LiDAR scanners, and we use the Faro software to process them. And then from that stage, I'm afraid to say, it disappears into ScanLab's black box, which is our the software that we've been carefully crafting for nearly 10 years now. So most of our visuals come out of our own software. There's an element of that software that we plug into Unity to whenever we're doing our kind of real-time stuff as well. But there are brilliant bits of software out there, some open source and some slightly more expensive. Like Bentley Point Tools is one that we've always found really amazing for exploring scan data. So that's quite a goodie. And to talk about sound, yeah, I mean, totally agree. Like, it's one of the most beautiful bits of FRAMERATE. I love Pascal's work. And I hope we will continue working with Pascal. I think, those are always amazing conversations. Like, we do a lot of sketching between each other. Somehow we can send him a visual sketch and he can send an acoustic sketch, and we can kind of bounce in that way. I guess the little detail that I just wanted to add is how much the pace of sound and the pace of playback is a real conversation that we have as well. Some of these sites are played at 14 days a second. Some of these sites are played at 27 days a second. And that's always a really interesting kind of negotiation between visual and sound. And sometimes a faster sound can hold a slower visual. And, so there's a whole world of fun stuff going on in there.
I'll pick up from there. So thanks, Amy, for your question. This is actually something I love talking about, so I'll try not to go on too long. Yeah, I guess so. My background working as a documentary producer, obviously there's so many different types of documentary, even if you're talking about film or VR, investigative or nature, science ones. But the ones which I primarily worked on were all narrative driven. And when you're creating a narrative driven documentary film or VR, the most important thing is, like, what is the story? Like, how are you going to tell it? Who's going to tell it? Like, what characters are you going to bring out? What's your story arc? What's your narrative? Like, what journey are you going to take the audience on? Like, all of that kind of stuff is so paramount. And that's kind of been drilled into me, I guess, you know, for a decade of work, 15 years of work. And so when I came to ScanLab and we were talking about frame rate, at first there was like a bit of friction inside me, because I was like, I don't understand, how is this a form of storytelling? And it definitely took some time to and I think one of the main turning points was when we first started sort of showing some of the visuals, and I saw that actually how audiences were responding and what they were learning from it, and how they were engaging with the content and the narrative that they were like they were filling in the gaps, and they were filling in from the experience or knowledge that they were bringing to the installation in the first place. Yeah, really sort of like they were able to tell their own story in their mind. And as I mentioned earlier, some people would sit and need like sort of a long time of deep reflection after, and had so many things to say that they've been able to pick up from the visuals that they'd seen. And I think it's a combination of sort of like just presenting the facts, but from all these different multiple perspectives, the combination of that plus people moving themselves through the work and able to pick up what they want to and have this personal response. And then also, of course, like the LiDAR factual recording, like all of that kind of combination, yeah, really made me kind of have to unlearn some, or not even unlearn, just it challenged some of my preconceptions. And yeah, there was a friction when I was going through that process, but by the end, I really appreciated having done so.
Thank you so much to both of you, Anita Jones and Matt Shaw, for taking us on this journey of the pulse of the earth. One quick last note from Paisley Smith. We just want to thank you so much for all your great support and vision. And I'm just going to throw to you, Paisley, quickly to tell us a little bit about Unity for Humanity.
Kat, first of all, that was an amazing presentation. Thank you so much to ScanLab. Wow, love it. Thank you so much for sharing everything you're working on. And also thank you so much to all of the Worlding Fellows for their incredible work over the intensive. It's been so amazing to get to know you and your work. And I also really wanted to thank all of the audience who are here today and share a little bit about Unity for Humanity. So Unity for Humanity is a community of social impact driven creators working in real-time 3D, XR, VR, games, films, all sorts of stuff. And we have a grant program, community grants, and we meet up regularly on Zoom to share our work and get technical support. And really just, we have a pretty thriving community of creators who meet. And I would invite anyone who's working at the intersection of impact and real-time 3D to join our community. And Kat, if you don't mind just sharing our link tree in the chat, that would be wonderful. If you go to that link tree, you'll see a sign-up form for our Discord, which is a great place for sharing your work, introducing yourself, and finding like-minded global creators. And I would also just urge anyone who's got a project that's in development or in production to apply for our grant that is going to be launching to the public on November 14th. Hot tip, if you join the Discord, it's live now for community members. So I really look forward to reviewing all your applications and hope I can support, our program can support your work. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Paisley, for your hot tips and all your time and generosity. And thank you to Srushti Kamat for producing and for your thought leadership. We're so honored to work with you. Thank you all. Thanks to everyone out there. Thank you, Sarah, also celebrating you today with your Chevalier at the French Embassy. So congratulations. And thank you for watching. See you next time.